Let me answer the first question first. If Russia invades, that means tanks or troops crossing the border of Ukraine again. Then there will be no longer a Nord Stream 2. We will bring an end to it.
How will you do that exactly? Since the project and control of the project is within Germany's control.
We will, I promise you, we'll be able to do it.
Hey, welcome back. This is part 3 of Seymour Hersh's report about the Nord Stream pipeline, the forethought, the planning, and now the operation in his report. And it's it's like 20 pages, so we've been working our way through. This is part 3 of 4 where we go into the operation. Just a quick replay. The players are Victoria Nuland, Anthony Blinken, and Jake Sullivan. And so we went over their involvement in the planning. And so let's without further ado, let's get into the operation, guys. I'm going to start reading Seymour's report. So here we go. Norway was the perfect place to base the mission. In the past few years, the East-West crisis, the U.S. military has vastly expanded its presence inside Norway, whose western border runs 1,400 miles along the North Atlantic Ocean, emerges above the Arctic Circle with Russia. The Pentagon has created high-paying jobs and contracts amid some local controversy by investing hundreds of millions of dollars to upgrade and expand American Navy and Air Force facilities in Norway. The new works included, most importantly, an advanced synthetic aperture radar far up north that was capable of penetrating deep into Russia and came online just as the American intelligence community lost access to a series of long-range listening sites inside China. A newly refurbished American submarine base, which had been under construction for years, had become operational, and more American submarines were now able to work closely with their Norwegian colleagues to monitor and spy on a major Russian nuclear redoubt 250 miles to the east on the Kola Peninsula. America also has vastly expanded a Norwegian air base in the north and delivered to the Norwegian Air Force a fleet of Boeing-built P-8 Poseidon patrol planes to bolster its long-range spying on all things Russia. In return, the Norwegian government angered liberals and some moderates in its parliament last November by passing the Supplementary Defense Cooperation Agreement, the SDCA. Under the New Deal, the U.S. legal system would have jurisdiction in certain agreed areas in the north over American soldiers accused of crimes off base, as well as over those Norwegian citizens accused or suspected of interfering with the work at the base. Norway was one of the original signatories of the NATO treaty in 1949, in the early days of the Cold War. Today, the Secretary General of NATO is Jens Stoltenberg, a committed anti-communist who served as Norway's Prime Minister for 8 years, before moving to his high NATO post with American backing in 2014. He was a hardliner in all things Putin and Russia, who had cooperated with the American intelligence community since the Vietnam War. He has been trusted completely since. He is the glove that fits the American hand, the source said. Back in Washington, planners knew they had to go to Norway. They hated the Russians, and the Norwegian Navy was full of superb sailors and divers who had generations of experience in highly profitable deep-sea oil and gas exploration, the source said. They also could be trusted to keep the mission secret. The Norwegians may have had other interests as well. The destruction of Nord Stream, if the Americans could pull it off, would allow Norway to sell vastly more of its own natural gas to Europe. Sometime in March, a few members of the team flew to Norway to meet with the Norwegian Secret Service and Navy. one of the key questions was where exactly in the Baltic Sea was the best place to plant the explosives. Nord Stream 1 and 2, each with 2 sets of pipelines, were separated much of the way by little more than a mile as they made their run to the port of Greifswald in the far northeast of Germany. The Norwegian Navy was quick to find the right spot in the shallow waters of the Baltic Sea, a few miles off Denmark's Bornholm Island. The pipelines ran more than a mile apart along the seafloor that was only 260 feet deep. That would be well within the range of the divers who, operating from a Norwegian Alta-class mine hunter, would dive with a mixture of oxygen, nitrogen, and helium streaming from their tanks and plant-shaped C4 charges on the 4 pipelines with concrete protective covers. It would be tedious, time-consuming, and dangerous work, but the waters off Bornholm had another advantage where there were no major tidal currents, which would have made the task of diving much more difficult. So here we have a map. There's the pipeline going to Germany, and the red and the yellow, Nord Stream 2, Norwegian Navy base is in red, the dot, and the Norwegian Air Base is in the blue dot. All right. After a bit of research, the Americans were all in. At this point, the Navy's obscure deep diving group in Panama City once again came into play. The deep sea schools at Panama City, whose trainees participated in Ivy Bells, are seen as unwanted backwater by the elite graduates of the Naval Academy in Annapolis, who typically seek the glory of being assigned as a SEAL, fighter, pilot, or submariner. If one must become a black shoe, that is, a member of the less desirable surface ship command, there is always at least duty on a destroyer, cruiser, or amphibious ship. The least glamorous of all is mine warfare. Its divers never appear in Hollywood movies or on the cover of popular magazines. The best divers with deep diving qualifications are a tight community, and only the very best are recruited for the operation and told to be prepared to be summoned to the CIA in Washington, the source said. The Norwegians and Americans had a location and the operatives, but there was another concern. An unusual underwater activity in the waters off Bornholm might draw the attention of the Swedish or Danish navies, which could report it. Denmark had also been one of the original NATO signatories and was well known in the intelligence community for its special ties to the United Kingdom. Sweden had applied for membership into NATO and had demonstrated its great skill in managing its underwater sound and magnetic sensor systems that successfully tracked Russian submarines that would occasionally show up in remote waters of the Swedish archipelago and be forced to surface. The Norwegians joined the Americans in insisting that some of the senior officials in Denmark and Sweden had to be briefed in general terms about possible diving activity in the area. In that way, someone higher up could intervene and keep a report out of the chain of command, thus insulating the pipeline operation. What they were told was that they knew were purposely different. Let me say that again. What they were told and what they knew were purposely different, the source told me. The Norwegian embassy asked to comment on this story did not respond. Of course. The Norwegians were key to solving other hurdles. The Russian Navy was known to possess surveillance technology capable of spotting and triggering underwater mines. The American explosive devices needed to be camouflaged in a way that would make them appear to be Russian system as part of the natural background, something that required adapting to the specific salinity of the water. The Norwegians had a fix. The Norwegians also had a solution to the crucial question of when the operation should take place. Every June for the past 21 years, the American 6th Fleet, whose flagship is based in Gaeta, Italy, south of Rome, had sponsored a major NATO exercise in the Baltic Sea, involving scores of Allied ships throughout the region. The current exercise, held in June, would be known as Baltic Operations 22 or Baltops 22. The Norwegians proposed this would be the ideal cover to plant the mines. The Americans provided one vital element. They convinced the Sixth Fleet planners to add a research and development exercise to the program. The exercise, as made public by the Navy, involved the Sixth Fleet in collaboration with the Navy's Research and Warfare Centers. The at-sea event would be held off the coast of Boram Island and involved NATO teams of divers planting mines with competing teams using the latest underwater technology to find and destroy them. It was both a useful exercise and ingenious cover. The Panama City boys would do their thing, and the C4 explosives would be in place by the end of the Baltop PS-22, the Baltops 22, with a 48-hour timer attached. All of the Americans and Norwegians would be long gone by the first explosion. The days were counting down. The clock was ticking, and we were nearing mission accomplished, the source said. And then Washington had second thoughts. The bombs would still be planted during Baltops, but the White House was worried that a 2-day window for their detonation would be too close to the end of the exercise, and it would be obvious that America had been involved. Instead, the White House had a new request. Can you guys in the field come up with some way to blow the pipelines later on command? Some members of the planning team were angered and frustrated by the president's seemingly indecision. The Panama City divers had repeatedly practiced planting the C4 on pipelines as they would during the Baltops, but now the team in Norway had to come up with a way to give Biden what he wanted, the ability to issue a successful execution order at a time of his choosing. Being tasked with an arbitrary last-minute change was something the CIA was accustomed to managing, but it also renewed the concern some shared over the necessity and legality of the entire operation. The president's secret orders also evoked the CIA dilemma in the Vietnam War days, when President Johnson, confronted by growing anti-Vietnam War sentiment, ordered the agency to violate its charter, which specifically barred it from operating inside America by spying on anti-war leaders to determine whether they were being controlled by communist Russia. Spying on its own citizens. Interesting that it's a violation of the charter, and they talk about it here, you know, for the CIA to spy on its own citizens. The agency ultimately acquiesced, and throughout the 1970s, it became clear just how far it had been willing to go. Acquiesce, I'm not sure. There was subsequent newspaper revelations in the aftermath of the Watergate scandals about the agency spying on American citizens, its involvement in the assassination of foreign leaders, and its undermining of the socialist government of Salvador Allende. Those revelations led to a dramatic series of hearings in the 1970s in the Senate, led by Frank Church of Idaho, that made it clear that Richard Helms, the agency director at the time, accepted that he had obligation to do what the president wanted, even if it meant violating the law. Kind of like listening to the devil, right? Just like in Canada. Going against your own Charter of Rights and Freedoms, going against your own Human Rights Act. Let's continue. In unpublished closed-door testimony, Helms ruefully explained that you almost have an immaculate conception when you do something under secret orders from a president, whether it's right that you should have it or wrong that you should have it. The CIA, working under different rules and ground rules than any other part of the government. End quote. He was essentially telling the senators that he, as head of the CIA, understood that he had been working for the crown and not the Constitution. Oh my God, it's just like in Canada. The Queen, the royal family, how it's the Royal Canadian Mounted Police, They don't work for the people, they work for the crown. They don't follow the Charter of Rights and Freedoms doesn't apply. It's so ridiculous. Let's continue. The Americans at work in Norway operated under the same dynamics and dutifully began working on the new problem, how to remotely detonate the C4 explosives on Biden's order. It was a much more demanding assignment than those in Washington understood. There was no way for the team in Norway to know when the president might push the button. It would be in a few weeks, in many months, or in half a year or longer. The C4 attached to the pipeline would be triggered by a sonar buoy dropped by a plane on short notice, but the procedure involved the most advanced signaling processing technology. Once in place, the delayed timing device attached to any of the 4 pipelines could be accidentally triggered by the complex mission of ocean background noises throughout the heavily trafficked Baltic Sea. Oh, wow, I didn't know that would be an issue for a sonar buoy signal. There's other sound waves and sonars in the ocean. Continuing. From near and distant ships, underwater drilling, seismic events, waves, and even sea creatures. Wow. To avoid this, the sonar buoy, once in place, would emit a sequence of unique low-frequency tonal sounds, much like those emitted by a flute or a piano, that would be recognized by the timing device and, after a preset hours of delay, trigger the explosives. You want a signal that is robust enough so that no other signal could accidentally send a pulse that demonstrates the explosives, I was told by Dr. Theodore Postel, Professor Emeritus of Science, Technology, and National Security Policy at MIT. Postel, who has served as the science advisor to the Pentagon's Chief of Naval Operations, said the issue facing the group in Norway because of Biden's delay was one of chance. The longer the explosives are in the water, the greater risk that there would be of a random signal that would launch the bombs. End quote. On September 26, 2022, a Norwegian Navy P-8 surveillance plane was made a seemingly routine flight and dropped a sonar buoy. September 26th. The signal spread underwater, initially to Nord Stream 2 and then to Nord Stream 1. A few hours later, the high-powered C4 explosives were triggered and 3 of the 4 pipelines were put out of commission. Within a few minutes, pools of methane gas that remained in the shuttered pipelines could be seen spreading on the water's surface, and the world learned that something irreversible had taken place. So, yeah, guys, so that was the planning execution, and now there's a short bit about the fallout. So let's just read the fallout and finish up. In the immediate aftermath of the pipeline bombing, the American media treated it like an unsolved mystery. Russia was repeatedly cited as a likable culprit, spurred on by calculated leaks from the White House, but without ever establishing a clear motive for such an act of sabotage beyond simple retribution. A few months later, when it emerged that Russian authorities had been quietly getting estimates for the cost to repair the pipeline, the New York Times described the news as complicating theories about who was behind the attack. No major American newspaper dug into the early threats to the pipeline made by Biden and Undersecretary of State of Nuland. I showed you the video in the beginning of Biden anyways. While it was never clear why Russia would seek to destroy its own lucrative pipeline, a more telling rationale for the president's action came from Secretary of State Blinken. Asked at a press conference last September about the consequences of the worsening energy crisis in Western Europe, Blinken described the moment as a potentially good one. And here we go into the quote. It's a tremendous opportunity to once and for all remove the dependence on Russian energy and thus take away from Vladimir Putin the weaponization of energy as a means of advancing his imperial design. That's very significant, and that offers tremendous strategy opportunity for the years to come. But meanwhile, we are determined to do everything we possibly can to make sure the consequences of all of this are not borne by citizens in our countries or, for that matter, around the world. End quote. Blinken. Continuing. More recently, Victoria Nuland expressed satisfaction at the demise of the newest of the pipelines. Testifying at the Senate Foreign Relations Committee hearing in late January, she told Senator Ted Cruz, "Like you, I am, and I think the administration is very gratified to know that the Nord Stream 2 is now, as you like to say, a hunk of metal at the bottom of the sea," end quote. The source had a much more streetwise view of Biden's decision to sabotage more than 1,500 miles of Gazprom pipeline as winter approached. "Well," he said, speaking to the president, "I gotta admit the guy has a pair of balls. He said He said what was going to do to it, and he did," end quote. So that's from the pipeline company. Asked why he thought Russians failed to respond, he said cynically, "Maybe they want the capability to do the same thing to the U.S. did." It was a beautiful cover story, he went on, and behind it was a covert operation that placed experts in the field and equipment that operated on a covert signal. The only flaw was the decision to do it. Wow, guys. It's really amazing that I just read that to you guys and to myself, and that this is real and this is really happening. Biden is the biggest terrorist in the world, backed by the control of the USA and NATO. A complete terrorist act of war. Thanks for listening, guys. Please give this post a like. That helps it push it into the algorithm. Share it on your small little social medias. Share it on your Twitter. Share it on whatever you have to share it on. Let's get this out there. Nobody is actually reading this in mainstream media. And I haven't seen anybody read it in detail such as that. So again, Ernie Racing News, guys. Beautiful sunny day. I should get to the gym now. Anyways, unbelievable. The detail in this report is off the hook, and I had no idea about the history in terms of Vietnam with the Vietnamese and how these things correlate, and nobody's really thought about the Norwegians and the involvement and the complicitness and how it helps them in cooperation. The CIA down to the whole Panama City divers. Catch you guys later.